Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a closer look at Queen's studio albums. My name is Adam, and in today's episode we'll be taking a look at Queen's 8th studio album, The Game, released June of 1980. We'll be comparing the formats between the vinyl record, the cassette tape, the compact disc, and a high definition source. Now, The Game is a very interesting album because it's kind of a first album for Queen in many different ways. It was the first time they were using the studios of Musicland in Munich, Germany, and it was the first time they had a new sound producer, Reinhold Mack. It was the first time they were using synthesizers on their albums, the Oberheim OBX, and it was the first album to give Queen a #1 hit album in the USA charts. It was also the first album to be recorded over an entire year. So it's a really interesting album, and if you think about it, I think it's more of a twin to A Night at the Opera than A Day at the Races is, which I think by the end of this video you'll understand why. The recording sessions, like I said, are been split over two very much distinctive sessions. The first session was between June and July of 1979, and the second sessions were between February and May of 1980. Now, this time for the band, they were kind of in a state of change. So the two recording sessions did output quite different music, and kind of gives this whole album, in terms of the songs, a very mixed bag of content. But because of the music production by the producer Mack, makes the album come together in a very unique sounding way, giving Queen a very fresh sound, probably down to the fact that the way Reinhold Mack works, from what Queen were used to with Roy Thomas Baker, who basically would get the band to record every song in one go, so they would do different takes or different tracks, and they would record the entire song in one take. And then they would build up the track. So, after a while, they were well rehearsed and well exercised in their playing, giving it kind of a very professional but rigid sound. Reinhold Mack had the opposite take on recording. He actually liked to get early takes, so having few takes as possible and kind of splitting a song up into sections that they then would sort of record a couple of times, and he would take one of those early takes, giving the songs a very fresh sound because they didn't do very many takes. Probably why there are so many songs that got unreleased from the Game sessions, and there were a lot more songs that they actually output from however many ended up on this album with the 35-minute runtime. So I think working with Mack really did help the sound of this album, because it has a very unique sound to it, almost like a rockabilly 60s sound to it in some songs, but then kind of a love ballady, rock feel in others. And I think that's down to the two distinct sessions that made up the album. In the late 70s, between June and July, Queen were going through a touring of the Crazy Tour, but also they were dressed in leathers, Freddie didn't have a mustache, and the hair wasn't as short as it would be a year later. And even in the video for Crazy Little Thing Called Love, you can see this look that they had, and this was showed on tour, even in the promotional shots for the album cover. But by 1980, between February and May, the band's look changed drastically. Freddie grew a mustache and had shorter hair. The band was no longer wearing leathers, they were wearing jeans and t-shirts, and their sound had changed and evolved to more of a sort of rock ballad love sort of song type, other than what they had come from, which was much more a rock or rockabilly sound from the late 70s, coming off the jazz album with Roy Thomas Baker. So I think Reinhold Mack really did leave an impression and had an influence on the sound of this album. And I think because of its rockabilly sound with songs like Need Your Loving Tonight, and another one, Bites the Dust, really gave Queen a new audience in America. Now, of course, the album was remastered loads of times because it was the #1 hit album for Queen in America. So this has had just as much attention on it as A Night at the Opera. Obviously, the first recording, the first pressing, the first mastering, however you want to say it, came out June of 1980. And that was done by Mac and Queen themselves. But after that, there was a 1991 Hollywood Records remaster done by Eddie Schreier. After that, there was a 1994 Kevin Metcalf remaster for the Digital Master series, as well as in between that, came out on CD, but it wasn't a remaster, it was just the original master that was used. After that, Peter Mew did a remaster in 1998 and again in 2001 using the 24-bit sourcings for those remasters. And then in 2003, Justin Shirley Smith remastered the album in 5.1 DTS surround for the DTS release. And then I believe it was released again on the mini LP in 2004, but that was using the 1998 Peter Mew master or the 2001 Peter Mew master. And then in 2008, using the Kevin Metcalf remaster, it was released on the Spanish book CD. And finally, in 2011, Bob Ludwig remastered the album from the original multi-track tapes for the Island record release, and then in 2012 on SACD. So it's had quite a few masters over the years. Now, which ones have I got? Well, I've got the original 1980 vinyl pressing, and that's the one I'll be listening to for the take on the vinyl. On cassette tape, I have got the Hollywood's Records 1991 Eddie Schreier remaster. And by the way, this tape is the reason why this video is actually out a little bit later than had been planned. Originally, I had sourced the Digital Master Series version, and I really do wish I had that version, but they never sent it, so I had to reorder with this one, and it took a while to come. It came from America, so apologies for the lateness of this video, but that tape is the reason why. But that's representing the tape. Representing on the CD is the 1998 Peter Mew Master, not the mini LP version. This is the first release, which just, I think, doesn't replicate the mini LP, like the LP, like the others have, but it kind of does at the same time. But anyway, that's the master for the CD we're using. And for the high definition source, now I don't have the SACD of this album, so for this one we're using the 2003 DTS 5.1 copy. Now, of course, this does come with a PCM stereo track, and it's that one I'm listening to for the purposes of this video. But that represents the high definition source. Now, obviously, the things I'm looking out for when I'm listening to this song is how does each album on the different formats sit well at a reference level. And I have both a digital reference level and an analog reference level, because obviously the outputs are very different across digital and analog. And to give it all a fair whack, I have a digital and an analog reference point. So like that is the level at which, I should be listening to, and then I can tell if the album has been mastered too loud or too soft, or if there's compression or distortion or other things, by listening at that reference level. And I gotta say, the results from this is the most interesting so far out of all the albums I've done so far. So yeah, like But other things I'm listening out for, obviously I'm listening for the clarity of the lead vocals and the distinction between the lead and the background vocals. I'm listening to clarity and fidelity between all the instrumentation from each of the band members. I'm listening for how deep does that bass go and how high do the highs go. I'm listening for the spatial, distancing between the left and the right speaker and how well that the album has been mixed spatially using that sort of area between left and right. And really how it creates, if you sit properly in front of a stereo pair of speakers and you have them leveled properly, if you sit directly in the center, those two speakers, left and right, will create a phantom center, by default. And if you close your eyes, you will physically feel that there is a third speaker in the middle, because you'll hear all of the majority of the music coming from this phantom center. And that it's a good test to how well the left and the right sort of 3D spatial area is used in the mixing and mastering of an album. Because if you hear vocals coming out dead center, or you hear the drum kit being spread across or coming dead center, you will then begin to hear other things hitting left and right incidentally, and it sort of shows you how not well an album gets mastered or mixed, but how well they use that space between a left and a right. And it's really interesting between all four of these how that was used. So let's get into it, shall we? So for the vinyl record, so this obviously was mastered and mixed by Queen and Mac themselves. So by all definitions, this is how the album should be heard. And let's crack it open before I talk about what I heard on this album. Now, the state of my album has got a few ticks and pops and crackles at the beginning of side A, but then they kind of disappear after about a minute, and then side 2 is perfectly clear. Side 1 is perfectly clear, except for the first minute where there is like ticks, pops, crackles, snap, crackle and pop, basically. So, but it doesn't take away from the audio fidelity at all. So that's the front cover, and it's quite interesting that there were 2 of these covers that were made. This is the original album cover, but there is an alternative source photo, which you'll see on another copy, that was used on other versions of this album. And I don't know why, because it looks exactly like the same photograph session. But as you can see, they're wearing their leathers. Freddie ain't got a mustache. That's the look of the band had when they first started recording in 1979 for the game sessions. That's what the back looks like. Very shiny, like a very metallic-y look to it, almost like a mirror. I can actually see myself reflected in that, so I gotta be careful with the glare. But yeah, really nice album cover. Inside, you got the the insert with the lyrics posted on one side, completely with the studio information down here, and then pictures of the band on this side, noting now that Freddie is sporting his mustache. And this was kind of typical of Queen. The Queen album cover generally was taken at the beginning of the recording sessions, and then any, photography done within the album was done towards the end of the sessions, with the exception of the Miracle, which all pictures come from the exact same photography session at the beginning of the album, as well as Innuendo, where again at the beginning of those sessions all the photography came from that one session, probably due to the Freddie's ill health. That's what the center spindle looks like, just a plain old white one, but classic. Now, the album sound itself, like I said, it has this very nice echo to it, almost. There's like a slap echo feel to it. Very 60s rockabilly, like Johnny B. Good or Elvis Presley. Almost like they're emulating, legends of the 60s. And I think that's down to Mac, but it has a very distinct sound. And I gotta say, from the vinyl, played at reference level, perfect. You know, it wasn't too loud, it wasn't too soft, everything played perfectly. Clearly, a very experienced engineer was at the desk when this was being mixed and mastered. You know, on side A to side B was consistent from beginning to end. It didn't suddenly start getting louder towards the end, or come in loud and go soft, or it was just an even level of volume throughout the entire album, and all the instrumentation was very well heard. Freddie's vocals front and center in that phantom center. So was, you know, Roger's drum kit and some of Brian's guitar work. Now, because there was a lot in that front phantom center, it left the extreme left and rights for the cymbals, the higher frequencies, some, you know, background vocals, and the incidental guitar work. And so using that left and right spatialness to good effect on some songs, but not all. Not as much as they did on Night of the Opera. Only on a couple of songs, maybe on one on side A and one on side B. But basically, the album has been mixed and mastered very well. Very clear. The bass was nice. The high ends were very clear. There was no muddy middle. There was good separation between the front lead vocal, Freddie, and the background vocal. No one song stood out with loud guitars, you know. This was a very nice album to listen to at my analog reference level. And overall, just how a Queen album should be mastered, I feel, you know. Reference album for mastering, I feel, you know. Pitch perfect. Now we get to the tape, the cassette tape, the Hollywood Records cassette tape, which I'll have to show you a bit closer, I feel. Obviously, same album shot cover. This actually has got a new song on here. I don't know why they did this. That's what the actual tape looks like, for anybody interested. This includes a remix of Dragon Attack by somebody, R-A-K. I can't really read it. It's so tiny. You might be able to read it better than I can if my camera will focus, but no, it won't. It has an extra track, mainly because this is Queen's shortest album. Only 35 minutes and 42 seconds in length. This is what the inside looks like. It's the lyrics, and then you have the publicity shots on the other side. I turned off that Dragon Attack song, the remix, after about 10 seconds, because at the end of the day, it doesn't feature on any other release, just this Hollywood Records version, and it's got nothing to do with the original album, and sounds absolute shit. So, turned it off. It's basically like a drum and bass orgy of Dragon Attack. Sounds absolute crap. Anyway, this was a very interesting listen, and I actually found myself listening to it twice. The reason being is the first time I listened to it, I thought Hollywood Records has ruined this mastering, you know, because not only was this 3 decibels above the reference level, so yes, this tape was louder than this vinyl by 3 decibels, but was much more clearer than the vinyl, was much more bassier. And the highs were there. It didn't sound like there was a cloth over the speakers. The highs were there, just as clear as they were on the vinyl. But there was more bass on this tape. There was more lower end than there was on the vinyl. It had a really nice separation. But for some reason, Freddie's vocals weren't front and phantom center. They were a little bit off to the left. And it was very loud. Like, not too loud, not clipping or distortion loud, but it was louder, 3 decibels louder. And it just didn't sound like it had been mixed correctly. Things weren't coming in the center as they were on the vinyl, and a majority of stuff was coming out of left and right equally. And it just sounded very strange. Now, it didn't sound like that on every single song, probably about 80% of the songs, both A and B. But it was a strange listen, and I thought Island Records have ruined this master. Until I looked at the spine, which you're never going to be able to read that. Basically, on the spine here, it says, obviously, Dolby system. They use a Dolby noise reduction system. But below, it says Dolby HX Pro. Like, what's that? I looked it up, and obviously it's a kind of a noise reduction process, not designed to remove hiss, but designed to expand the headroom on the tape, to be able to fit more into the tape and saturate the tape even further by basically compressing it in the recording and then having it expand on the playback, which is probably why it was 3 decibels too loud. But I looked up what a HX Pro, kind of how you have to play it, and on my system, and my player says you don't have to activate anything. It's built in already to the tape deck I've got. You just play it to tape and it'll play back as it should. But playing it back as it should, it really did not sound well mastered. Like I said, Freddie's vocal had been shifted a little bit to the left from the phantom center, and a lot of other instruments that were center before were now equal in both left and right, and it sounded weird. So I activated my Dolby C noise reduction system, and suddenly it all went back to normal. The Freddie vocal was now phantom front up center, and no longer could I hear the double left and right kind of instrumentation. It was sounding exactly like the vinyl album, except 3 decibels louder and much more clearer. So by activating Dolby C noise reduction, basically fixed from what I thought was a mastering error or a bodge in the mastering. No, it wasn't. It was basically the HX Pro Dolby system in effect, giving more headroom, allowing for more frequencies in, compressing the music down to then be sort of unzipped on playback, to get more out of the tape, basically. And it really did. It had a lot more weight than the vinyl record. It was a lot more louder, but not clipping or distorted louder, and it sounded a lot better than the vinyl record. But having to play it back with Dolby C meant that the vocals then, yes, were as they should, but it didn't stay that way for the entirety of the album. Towards the end, the vocals again began to slip off, and I do think that this was the intent for the mastering, to get more out of it by having the vocals sound clearer or something, or I don't know. On side B, Freddie's vocal did start to slip again towards the left speaker, halfway between the phantom center and the left, and it just sounded on side B a little bit weird, but a very pleasant listen to. I would say out of the Hollywood record masters I've heard, this is the better one. And like, much better than the vinyl, but again, 3 decibels louder than it really should have been. I've even took a video of it going over to the 3 decibels on my system. So a very interesting read. Or rather a listen to, sorry. I don't know what I'm reading. Reading the tunes flying in the air. So moving now on to the CD. Now this is the 1998 master from Peter Mew. And a very, again, interesting listen, because in the past the CD has actually won a couple of times. Now this isn't the mini LP vinyl replica, although the disc does come in an elephant condom, but does not actually reflect the artwork on the middle of the record. It's just a plain metallic with the writing on, which is a bit strange. It's in an elephant condom though, and it has got a little pull out of the publicity photos, but it's not got the reverse of the lyrics because it's not the mini LP version. This is just a CD version, a Japan CD version. The lyrics are actually printed on a separate insert inside in Japan for this album. So that's basically what it looks like. It's, yeah, it's a shame, really, because I thought this was the mini LP version that I had, but clearly not. But the sound on here, which is more important than the actual album itself, what it looks like. There's the back, by the way. Very nice and shiny. The sound on here, again, it was mastered too loud. This was 5 decibels too loud, maybe 7 even. This was louder than the tape and the vinyl record, and, you know, there were moments when it was a bit distorted, you know. Roger's drums, you know, during the louder moments of a song got distorted, clipped. Clearly this was taken from a 24-bit source, and obviously CD only being a 16-bit 44 kilohertz, you're losing frequencies all over the shop, and it does sound like that. It sounds like there should have been more to this album. Now, in terms of the clarity of the instrumentation and the weight of the bass and the clarity of the highs, it was all there. Yes, it was actually a lot more detailed than the tape in that respect. There was no hiss, you know, that I heard from the vinyl, or I didn't really hear tape hiss either on the tape, but, you know, the original hiss from the master tapes could not be heard on the CD. It was a very detailed listen. Like, I heard more detail in Freddie's vocal breath, or the drums coming soon, the beginning, you know, was really nice, more so than the tape and vinyl. This had a lot more clarity, but it was just too loud and clipped and distorted, so it wasn't really a pleasant. Once I turned it down by 5 decibels, then it became an enjoyable listen. But very much, you know, CD limited, coming from a much more detailed source, you know, and if anything, coming from a source that also came from a source probably didn't help. But moving now on to the DTS audio. Now, this was done by Justin Shirley Smith and Bob Ludwig, so Brian's fingerprints weren't all over this. Like it was with The Night at the Opera, and it shows because his guitar parts aren't louder, you know, than anything else. But what is louder is the entire album. On the PCM, you know, stereo track, 96 kilohertz, 24 bits, it is 7 to 10 decibels too loud. It has been ramped up, compressed down, so you hear a lot of detail, and probably the most detailed copy out of all 4 of them. But it's too loud. Once I turned it down by 7 decibels, it then became an enjoyable listening experience. Until Crazy Little Thing Called Love came on. Now, the track length, or the album length, is 35 minutes. But Crazy Little Thing Called Love seemed to be sped up to me, and was confirmed when I played this back, not only using a different DVD player, but also listening to a version on my computer and the tape again. Crazy Little Thing Called Love plus a couple of other songs are slightly sped up from their original speed on this album, on the stereo track version anyway. Crazy Little Thing Called Love has a little bit more of a swifter playthrough than it should do, and it's noticeable, to me anyway. This was not a good listening experience because A, it was too loud, and B, some of the songs were sped up. Not all of them, but some. There was a couple on side A, or what would be side A, and about 1 or 2 on side B. It was very strange. The drums to Coming Soon, the intro drums, were very detailed, and I heard things in this version that I didn't hear in any of the other versions. In fact, this sounded like what the CD should have sounded like, I feel. This had all that clarity that was missing, all the detail, all the missing frequencies. This had it all, but it was just mastered too loud. It was well louder than the vinyl record, and that is probably a format thing, but doesn't mean those you know, extra decibels need to be, you know, filled in just because you've got a wider decibel range. You know, if it's not there, it's not there. The vinyl record, I felt, was actually a very nice listen, you know. I didn't have to change anything on the vinyl record. I could listen to it at reference level, and I heard what I felt was what the band wanted. The tape, on the other hand, only was about 3 decibels too loud. It was also a very nice listen, more so than the vinyl. And if you turn it off before the remix Dragon Attack, you will enjoy listening to this. I enjoyed listening to the vinyl, but I enjoyed the tape better. Okay, the tape to me is more better than the CD by far. This one is too loud, and it's wincingly too loud, and this one is even louder than the CD. Like, turn it down by 10 notches and then you'll hear what it should have sounded like. But other than that, like, this to me is a no-go because of those few songs that are just moving at a swifter pace than they should be. Now, I didn't listen to the 5.1 track, the DTS or the Dolby Digital, because it wouldn't be fair, to the other albums, having been stereo and then suddenly I'm surrounded by, But the clarity on this was there, yes, but the whole album was ruined because some of them were sped up, and it is noticeable. Somebody might say they weren't sped up, but definitely on Crazy Little Thing Called Love, that had a much swifter, and if you tried to time it with your finger snapping, you will not keep up. It does go out of time. It's weird, If I had to choose, which was my favorite way to listen to this album, I think I would have to go for the cassette tape by Hollywood Records. It did sound like they had mastered this and increased the levels on it, and also using the HX Pro system, meaning I had to redo my system to be able to listen to it properly, but it had the best sound on it. It was more punchier, and just as clear as the vinyl record. This wasn't like any signals loss. I swear this must have been the first time this tape was played, because the high end was there. The cymbal crashes, the hi-hats, all very sounding exactly like they did on the vinyl record. It was frequencies high, and the low, it was more bassier than the vinyl record itself. And it was drums were clear, they weren't muddy, they weren't clipped. It did sound like all the volumes had been given a little boost, a little push, but not to a point of overdue like it was on the CD and the DVD. It sounded like they were pushed too far, on these two. I did not enjoy listening to this until I turned it down by 5 decibels, and then it became enjoyable, but it sounded like there was something missing. It didn't sound like there was anything missing on this cassette tape. I would be really interested now to track down that Digital Master series from Kevin Metcalf to compare with the Hollywood Records version, because this is my favorite way to listen to the game. It's clear, it's punchy, the separation of the instruments was great, and apart from a song on side 2 and a song on side 1, everything is as it should have been heard. Freddie's vocals coming out of the Phantom center, Roger's drum kit coming out of majority of the center, but then also the left and the right. Brian's guitars kind of sharing that middle space between the left and the right as well, and then shooting across sometimes. And I forgot to mention, on all of these, John Deacon's bass is very well heard. Probably the one album so far where I hear John Deacon's bass the most. On the vinyl record, it's there, but you hear it, especially on Another One Bites the Dust, Need Your Loving Tonight. His bass is prominent in the mix, and on this one it has a different sound to it. It has a much more it has kind of a bang sound to it, there's low ends missing, but on here it's full and it's boom beefy, and John Deacon's bass sounds really nice on the tape. John Deacon's bass sounds really nice on these two formats too, but Roger's drum kit, especially the bass kick drum, or the kick drum, sounds the best on this version. Save Me. You really hear it hitting that kick drum and it having a full sound, a full beefy sound. Not so much on the CD. The CD, it kind of felt like it was lacking a bit. It did also feel not as detailed on the tape or the vinyl record, but on this one, Roger's kick drum was as it probably was in the studio. Like, this, I think, represents the studio version apart from the speed up of the tape. I don't know what was going on with that, but yeah, let me know your thoughts. What's your favorite way to hear the game album? I'd really love to know. This is my favorite way. I will track down the Digital Master Series, which I honestly thought I had, and is the reason why this video is so late to the game, pun intended, because I had to track down another source which never came, and then I had to track down this source which took like a month to come. So if you're wondering why in my last video and in the Flash Gordon video I was talking about A Kind of Magic being the next one, is because A Kind of Magic is the next video I will record, you know. And if you're wondering when I talked about the game, well, you didn't talk about the game yet. This is that video that was meant to be uploaded before Flash Gordon was published. Unfortunately, this single tape was slowing me down. So apologies for that. It will be put in the right order when this video is uploaded. And in the next video, we will be comparing the formats between the A Kind of Magic album, which I can't wait because I really do like that album. But let me know your thoughts of which album version you prefer the most. I have got literally them all. I can listen to the Digital Master Series on my computer, but it's not the same listening to it on the reference system, you know, with the speakers coming out. It's a very much different experience, but I suppose I could give it a go, though. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.